it was really funny because I had zero clinical experience, zero experience in the OR, obviously. And so they're there trying to explain to me what minimally invasive surgery is and what laparoscopy is. And my eyes were just, bugging out of my head.
He's our guest. He works for Eko Health. He's an account executive. And David, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Looking forward to it, man.
Well, David, tell us a little bit what you do in your current role at Eko Health.
Yeah. So Eko Health, it's not a new company. We've been around for a few years, primarily selling direct to consumer with our digital stethoscopes. So our founders, right out of college, they basically wanted to redesign the stethoscope, a device that really hasn't been changed in almost 200 years. And so over the past few years, they've been selling direct to consumer. And what they've done is they've cataloged millions of heart sounds and built an algorithm off of those heart sounds that can effectively detect structural heart disease at the point of primary care. And so what my position is selling this new software that we've developed, this new algorithm called Sensora, bringing it out into the marketplace. I cover the Western US. We are FDA cleared. We've got all of our boxes checked, but it's our job to now get this out in the marketplace and get this thing off the ground. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm doing now.
Well, I went to your website. It looks very exciting. We'll leave a link to that on our website and also here at the podcast so others can see it. But it's fascinating, the innovation, and now leveraging the analytics and the artificial intelligence in addition to this new technology. So what is your main call point? Is it to cardiologists? Is that who you're talking to?
That's a great question. I think that's a part of what we're trying to figure out. I think originally we did think structural heart would kind of be our main call point, but it's an interesting product in that, the user is going to be primary care physicians primarily. Mm-hmm. So primarily primary care. We've seen a lot of use cases in urgent care and EDs, but effectively downstream, those patients are going to be referred to structural heart. So interventional cardiology has certainly been a big call point as well. VPs of cardiac service lines within divisions, within health systems, COOs, chief medical officers, those have all really been our primary care point. And we're in a phase right now where we're doing pilot programs. And so before we distribute this out into the marketplace and really do a full official launch, we're wanting to prove this out into the marketplace. We've done our clinical studies, we've done our due diligence, but we really want to hone in on some of these pilot sites and not only gather data for ourselves, but gather data for our current and future customers, really to kind of give it a test run and see where this might fit in their practice.
Wow. So you mentioned that you cover the West. So what does that look like? How many states do you cover?
Yeah, a lot different from my previous role. I cover everything pretty much west of the Mississippi. So St. Louis and west all the way to Hawaii, I guess, if you want to consider that, but in the lower 48 all the way to California. And so I know that sounds like a lot of managing a large area and a lot going on. But like I said, we are super hyper focused on a select number of health systems and IDNs right now. And so it's been manageable. I really enjoyed it. One of the IDNs or one of the health systems is located here in Denver, which makes it easy. But I think it's also just realizing that patient populations look different everywhere. Heart disease prevalence may not be the same here in Denver as it is like somewhere in St. Louis or somewhere in Louisiana. And so being able to kind of adapt and adjust to certain patient populations, but also different strategies within certain health systems has been a learning process for me, but also really interesting throughout that entire process, which has been neat.
Very interesting. It seems that these health systems are getting bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. They're requiring smaller groups. And there seems to be, with COVID, even since there seems to be a challenge with access. That's everything that lots of reps will, talk about, the challenges of access. So I'm just curious here, like if you're trying to reach these key accounts that you have your focus on and you're trying to reach that hospital administrator or CEO or decision maker that has, all these other reps trying to reach him or her, how do you do that? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, man, I feel like especially for device reps, it has become harder and harder to get access into the hospital itself. There are a lot of barriers in place to prevent reps from coming in to cold call, to come in unannounced. And in a way, rightfully so. I mean, and we can talk about this in depth, Dave, of just
Yeah.
sales in general, because I think at the end of the day, nobody likes a salesperson. I've
Right.
been in sales for over a decade, and I don't like salespeople. Right? No one likes to be sold to, and especially in healthcare, medical sales is such a different type of sales. They've got a lot going on. There is a patient involved in medical sales,
Mhm.
and I think that is what differentiates medical sales from other industries, and what will continue to differentiate it from other industries is that there is that patient involved. And so, rightfully so, there's going to be some red tape to get in. But gosh, I mean, you've got rep tracks, you've got rep scrubs, you've got all these different credentialing systems now, basically to make it as difficult as possible for sales reps to come into a hospital and do their job. And so I think first and foremost, it's relationships, but also making sure that you're trying to sell somebody something that is going to align with their goals.
Mhm.
Knowing when to walk away, not casting a wide net, but really hyper focusing on, who is my prospect and who's going to be my customer. Identifying those economic users, those economic buyers, those user buyers, finding those people who are really going to be able to benefit from your product, and finding those people who are going to have the patients that are going to eventually benefit from your product. Because again, at the end of the day, I think if you keep the patient in mind throughout your entire career and just throughout your time in sales, then you're gonna land on your feet at some point. But yeah, I think to answer your question directly, Dave, I think just developing relationships, developing rapport, developing trust. If you ruin your reputation up front, nobody's going to want to talk to you. But I think it's always good to, come into a facility as a warm call. So instead of cold calling, you want to establish some sort of communication with them, whether that's on the phone, email, LinkedIn, finding a way to get in front of them. There are so many conventions, expos, conferences out there that give you the opportunity to at least have a name in mind, someone who can know your face, know your name, and possibly introduce you to somebody. But I will say, though, there are some instances where walking in and doing a cold call might be necessary. And I think that's a part of sales. I hate cold calling on the phone, but I always did enjoy cold calling in person. But
Yes.
you're not going to make a sale in your first upon your first cold call, especially in capital device sales. There's got to be a relationship that develops over time to where they trust you, they know your product, and then hopefully eventually get into a selling situation.
Persistence, fact finding, finding out the right connection, and it's doesn't
Yeah.
happen overnight. And for our audience, this is fascinating. Dave, I want to get into asking you a little bit how you broke into the industry and take you back to the earlier years, because that's what we're helping people do. But
Yeah.
interestingly, for our audience, I met David years ago when I was a teacher. David was one of my students. It was my first year teaching. David was a senior. And you as a young man were gifted in sports. I remember did you win you won state championship in football, didn't you? Right?
We did. Yeah.
Yeah.
2005 was the
Well, you're
first
wide
one the
receiver.
school ever got.
Yes, wide receiver, and you played basketball. I did a little bit of coaching. You played baseball too, I believe. But David was gifted in the arts as well. You're creative. I think at that time in your life, you were interested in a little bit more of the creative side. Tell us a little bit about that journey
Yeah.
since I was teaching you. And, I always remember you had a great family. I think your younger brother, is he still playing baseball?
He is. Yeah. So he was with the Royals organization for the past 4 years, and actually just got traded to the Orioles. So he's up in Baltimore now, which is
Wow.
super exciting. So
Yeah,
yeah,
athletic
he's doing
family.
really well. What's
Athletic
that?
athletic family. I remember your dad was about my
Yeah.
height. He was about,
Oh yeah.
6'7", yeah. So, well,
I got
that's
more of my
great.
mom's height than my dad's height, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, yeah, hey, you were, extremely athletic. Tell us a little bit about your like, what happened after I went from teaching you, you went off to college. Tell us a little bit about how you went from that to your early career, then to getting into your first position in medical sales.
Yeah, I did not plan on getting into medical sales out of high school. That's for sure. I think the ultimate dream was I wanted to work for Pixar one day, and so really I was an AP art all through high school. Um, that was something I was gifted in, something I really enjoyed, and so I actually majored in digital media arts for 2 years for my freshman and sophomore year in college,
Mhm.
and was taking the courses, really enjoyed it, but I think there's a obviously a time after you graduate where you're on your own. You start to um, adjust to the real world and understand, okay, what is my future going to look like? How am I
Mhm.
going to provide for my family eventually? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do with the rest of my life? And so I think there was this process of where I kind of had to reassess, like, what are my goals, but what are my gifts? And I enjoyed it, but I quickly realized, Dave, that I was not as good as I thought I was. And so thankfully I realized it then and not later. But ended up transferring and ended up changing my major to business. I wanted to kind of have a generic major that I knew I could
Mhm.
do a lot of things with, but also get that knowledge and get that experience in business and just have a good base. And so I actually took the best of both worlds with business and art, and I was in advertising for the first 4 years out of college. So got an internship with a ad agency in Dallas during my senior year. So I was taking courses at UT Dallas my senior year, but also working full time at this ad agency. And they hired me on as a full time employee right after I graduated. I was with them for 4 years, had an absolute blast. Really learned how to interact with customers, sell them on ideas. Worked as an account executive, so I was in the more business side of the ad industry rather than the creative side. But really enjoyed it, and I think, again, the same thought process. I really loved interacting with customers. I really loved developing strategies with them, helping them accomplish their goals. And a family friend of ours actually through Prestonwood reached out one day. I want to say this was like 2013. Brent Trammell. I don't know if you know that name, Dave, but Brent was an incredible man. He sadly passed away a couple years ago after about, gosh, I think a 10 or 11 years with brain cancer. But
Wow.
an incredible man. He had three boys that went to PCA. But he reached out to me one day in 2013 and was like, hey, have you ever thought about getting into medical sales? And the answer was no. I hadn't really thought about it. I had certainly heard about it. It was kind of this cool, sexy job that I had heard about,
Right.
but I wasn't really interested in leaving the advertising world. And so I actually ended up going to grab dinner with him and his colleague, Rob Snyder. And it was really funny because I had zero clinical experience, zero experience in the OR, obviously. And so they're there trying to explain to me what minimally invasive surgery is and what laparoscopy is. And my eyes were just, bugging out of my head. But this was for an on-site position at BUMC, Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas,
Mm.
similar to like a Stryker Pro Care position. And I said no. I basically said, I'm not looking to leave right now. Thanks so much for thinking about me. And it wasn't until a year later that he and Rob actually reached back out to me and said, hey, we've got this sales associate position available. Would you consider it? And at that point, I wasn't super happy with where I was in the ad agency. It was really the perfect timing,
Wow.
all in God's timing for sure. And I said yes. And I quit my job in the ad world. And I think 3 days later, I was in an operating room as a sales
Really?
associate,
Wow.
trying to
That's
figure out
amazing.
what was going on. And I've got a good story about my first OR experience if you want to
Yeah,
get
go
into
for it.
that. But
Tell us that. Tell us your first experience.
that yeah, so that's really how I got into the med device world. And so yeah, real quick, first operating room experience. This was obviously before like all the credentialing stuff. So I mean, this was almost 10 years ago. But credentialing's got a lot more strict now. But at this point, I basically could just go in with my senior rep and just observe and learn the ropes. And so I walk in there. He actually had to step out and I think take a call or something, but just left me in the OR by myself. So here I am in
Whoa.
scrubs for the first time. I have no idea what's going on. I want to say it was like I think it was a lap chole, but I get in there. I have my notebook because I want to take as many notes as possible. I walk in there and I immediately put my notebook down on a blue drape. I had no idea. And so I immediately got kicked out of the OR. Nurses are screaming at me, the surgeon's screaming at me, what are you thinking?
Wow.
And yeah, so my very first surgery experience, got kicked out of the OR because I put my notebook down on a sterile drape, and they ended up having
Wow.
to basically break down the whole table, reprocess everything. But lesson
Wow.
learned. That never happened again.
Lesson learned, but you showed up, and I'm sure every single rep listening today who's new is like they miss those days with that access. But again,
Oh yeah.
sounds like your mentor left you hanging there for a second. But what was that like for? Because there's a lot of these associate roles pop up frequently, and I think it's a good first position for a lot of people who want to be a medical
Yeah.
device. But it's a lot of hard work, and it's challenging to get these positions. I mean, there's a lot of applications. Now, in your situation, I think you have, what Jim Collins wrote about in that best-selling book, Good to Great, that you just get the
Yeah.
right people on the bus, and it doesn't matter what they're doing. I mean, when I knew you as a student, you stood out, you got good grades, you played like 3 sports, you were in the arts, you were popular. I mean, everything. You communicated well. I knew your parents, good family. And those skill sets will transfer, and that's why you were pursued by these others as well. But you obviously had to interview well. But there's a lot of people who want these associate positions. What
Yeah.
is it like those first 2 years? I mean, it is hard work. Tell us a little bit about being a sales associate and how that was like at stores.
Yeah. Very, very difficult job. I think to preface, I talked about my thoughts on the medical device world before I knew about it, and I think the reputation of medical device sales is that it's this sexy job. You get to wear scrubs. The financial possibilities are good. There's just kind of this idea of the medical sales world in general, when in reality it isn't. It is a very, very difficult job in a very high stressful environment. I mean, you're in surgery. In some cases, people's lives are on the line. You may see some pretty interesting things, while you're while you're doing your job. It's an interesting industry, but it's very, very difficult. It's extremely competitive. You have contracts and red tape to navigate constantly. But as an associate, and you said the word mentor earlier, Dave, and it really is that relationship. It was really an apprenticeship, and what it allowed me to do was mess up many, many times without suffering the repercussions of not attaining a quota or burning bridges with customers. I could really just learn and learn for those 2 years or so. And I was fortunate to be with a senior rep in Rob Snyder, who had been in that territory for I think about 15 years at the time. And he's still there. He's been there about 25 years, but the relationships and the reputation that he had grown for himself over those years was just incredible. And so anytime I went into a facility, they knew the store's name on my badge. They knew what product I was going to come in and talk about, and they knew our reputation that we had in the territory. So I was fortunate to have that incredible experience, but also that incredible environment where for the most part, people were fairly friendly, especially in incumbent accounts. And so I think it is very hard to get into the industry, and that's what's crazy about it, man. Is it's like once you get a foot in the door, you're in, and you're
Right.
there to stay. You can really move around as much as you want,
Mhm.
but it is very, very hard to break in. And I think simply it's because it's just a very competitive industry. A lot of people want to be in this world. It's a unique selling environment. I'm biased for sure, but I think that there is. I don't think there's any more challenging of an environment than capital medical device sales because you're navigating the budget. It's high dollar equipment that is used for a long time. So once you make the sale, it's going to be there for, maybe 5 to 10 years. And on the other side, if your competitor beats you to it, or if your competitor renews a sale, then they're going to be in there for about 5 to 10 years. And so
Mhm.
you really have to constantly be thinking about, what's next. Like I said, navigating contracts. But again, we would always say contracts are just a license to sell, because if you have a nice contract with this hospital and then there's a large merger, well, your contract doesn't mean anything anymore. And so it's a fun industry, but it's difficult. And I can't think of any better way than to start off as an associate.
That's great. For our listeners who are not in the industry and they're curious, and I am too, because right now my role
Yeah.
in pharmaceutical sales, there are, as far as the negotiation of contracts, in certain positions we're very limited in what we can do. I mean, there's GPO contract. There's a lot of things out of our hands that take place. What is that like when you're in that role? Um, as you're learning how to navigate and negotiate those contracts as well. Is it that on your team, the perimeters in which you can, or is it constantly going back to your team, then coming back? What does that look like? And how many times when you're negotiating, is there just like one price that you have already, that your company has decided you on, or do you have freedom in these situations to
Yeah.
make changes to the contract or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, it varies. And, I think in the upper echelon of contracts would be a sole source contract. So if you have a sole source contract with a large health system or an IDN, then that's a good place to be, because typically it's a 90% 10% contract, where if they're going to purchase this certain product and you have it, then they have to purchase 90% of those products from you. So whether that's in one facility or multiple facilities across the IDN, however that might work. But at Carl Stort's, I was selling primarily video and endoscopic video systems, so minimally invasive camera sets, scopes, minimally invasive instrumentation, but also operating room integration, which really takes all the cameras, the vitals machines, any video source in the entire room, and kind of brings it all together and allows you to distribute those images, patient health information, et cetera, around the operating room. And so there were many instances where we might be on contract for operating room integration, but not for video,
Mm.
endoscopic video. And in fact, there were a lot of instances where our competitor might have one and we might have one. And so the negotiation process, I really wasn't much of a part of it until my sales engineer role. And then now in my new role with Eko, I'm a part of it quite a bit. But the roles out there with enterprise sales and commercial sales, they're really out there meeting with the IDNs regularly, forging relationships at the health system level, and managing those contracts. But when it's time for a contract renewal, I'd say a lot of times those go out to bid for IFU. I mean, these health systems, they have to do their due diligence, and they might be married to a certain vendor for 5 years for a 5-year contract. But when that 5 years is up, they might want to put their feelers out there, see if they can get a better deal price wise, see if they can get a better value, see if they can get better technology. I mean, technology is constantly changing and constantly growing. So the negotiation and the IFU process can get pretty, I don't want to say dirty, but it can get pretty intense, especially when there's 4 or 5 competitors involved, because it's an all hands on deck situation for sure. And if you don't have
Yeah.
those relationships, even if it is a competitive account, if you haven't been working on those relationships over the past few years, then you're most likely going to get passed over.
Yes. Very exciting. Tell us, can you tell us a little bit about your different roles? Because after a couple of years, it looks like you were full-fledged, I guess, sales executive. And then when you're with Carl Sorts, you were a sales engineer. Tell us a little bit about the distinction in those roles and how that changed.
Yeah. So I took a position up here in Colorado covering the western portion of the state, and that was surgical sales executive was my title, but it was a smaller kind of rural territory. So I was a full line sales rep. So I was able to carry the whole bag, which was a lot of fun. Typically in a lot of companies, in stores in particularly, you'll have, an ENT division rep, you'll have an airway rep that sells anesthesia and emergency department equipment. And then you'll have Euro GYN reps, and then surgical reps. I was able to carry the full bag and sell really anything in our portfolio. And so I did that for about 7 years out in the mountains, and carried that bag. And eventually, so a lot of what I sold, Dave, was our integration portfolio. And a lot of that was because that was my low hanging fruit out in the mountains. It was extremely saturated with ortho companies. They really, they really did a good job and kind of had a stronghold in the mountains as far as video equipment goes, scopes, et cetera. So my low hanging fruit was OR integration. I could really even approach some of my competitors and say, hey, let's partner on this deal. If you want to lock this certain vendor out, let me take a stab at the integration. You keep the video, that sort of strategy, and really fell in love with the tech side of our business. We sold a lot of EHR software as a part of that portfolio, a lot of really cool technology. And I really fell in love with that portion of the bag. And so I wanted to kind of get some experience at the region level as well. And so the sales engineer role allowed me to do that, where I was no longer covering a territory, but an entire region, the Rocky Mountain region, working with 8 reps in the region, and solely selling our technology portfolio. So it was a sales role. It was also a sales support role. So, a lot of these reps would kind of be the boots on the ground. They'd be the ones forging their relationships, getting the deal started. And then I would come in kind of at a more strategic level, or a supportive role, and helping close these deals, helping the installs go well, the planning of the OR. And so I think getting that selling experience for 7 years and then this sales engineer experience for almost 2 years really helped me then transition into this startup world where I am now.
That's great. There's a lot of our listeners who have been in the industry for a while. They've worked for a great company, and sometimes going to a startup, there's a lot of questions. There's pluses and minuses. There's new challenges, different sets of challenges. If someone is considering an opportunity with a startup, leaving a larger, well-known company, what questions do you encourage that rep to make sure they're doing their due diligence before they make that jump? What are some things you would encourage them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm almost 6 months into it, and I'm having an absolute blast. It's exciting. No 2 days are the same. I love the intimacy of the startup. What I've heard a lot is that you really get to see how the sausage is made, and you get to see all of it. I think it's extremely immersive. It's extremely challenging bringing a new product to market, but I think when you see an entire company that has a common goal, they know exactly where they want to be going, and there's really just one goal in mind. There's something really exciting about that. But going from a large medical device company to a startup was certainly a culture shock for sure. I think if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, if you're a little more independent, if you kind of like going at your own pace, and not necessarily being on your own, because I do feel like I have a lot of support now, but just having less resources. If you enjoy that certain environment, I think the startup world is a great thing to try out. And I haven't been here for very long, so I know I have a lot to learn and a lot to experience. But I think the biggest things you probably want to check off the list before you make the transition is make sure you believe in the product, make sure you believe in the technology, and really see where this technology could go. I think the other piece is know who you're going to be working with. So I'm fortunate to be working with some of the best in the business. That was really really a big reason why I took the leap. A lot of the guys who I'm working with were with Intuitive at its inception and at its beginning. A lot of them were some of the first reps that were selling the Da Vinci robot with Intuitive about 15 years or so, and so they really got to see what it was like to bring this extremely disruptive piece of technology into a marketplace that didn't necessarily think it was needed, and absolutely succeeded. And so it was really cool it has been really cool to just get a lot of insights from them. But I have learned so much in the past 5 months than I ever thought I could. Not just about business and bringing a product to market and strategy with customers, but also just about myself and how to interact with people. A lot of high level conversations, a lot more strategic of an approach. I was used to walking into a facility like I had mentioned, and they know your company, they know your product, they're familiar with what you're doing. This is the exact opposite. A lot of people have never heard of us. They've never heard of our product. They're not familiar with it. And so with that comes a completely different approach, obviously, a different way in how you approach customers and how you speak to them, but also in how you speak about the product. And it's been an incredible experience so far. But I wouldn't have been here if I didn't believe in the product and the people that I knew I was going to be working with.
David, that sounds exciting. It sounds like you have, great future ahead this year in 2024. Tell us a little bit. You left Texas and you're in Colorado. Tell us a little bit about your family and just maybe what you do outside of work.
Yeah, left Texas. I'll tell you, man, going back to Texas is the weird part. we were there for Thanksgiving, and every time we go to Dallas, I just cannot believe how much has changed. It is wild. I don't know when the last time you were back there was, but it's pretty incredible. But we absolutely love Colorado. We've fallen in love with it up here. We were in the Denver area for about 6 years and just moved up to Fort Collins this past year up in northern Colorado. So a little slower up here, a little more our pace. We're absolutely loving it. But yeah, there's so much to do up here. I've always loved the outdoors. I've always loved being outside. I'd probably put fly fishing up at the top if I had to pick a hobby. I think if it's spring, summer, or fall, then I'm probably on a river somewhere if I'm not with my family. But I'm quickly getting them into it, so I should have some good fishing buddies here pretty soon. But yeah, fishing, hunting, hiking, just being outside in general, we absolutely love it up here.
Wow, that's great. Well, great looking family. Saw your picture on LinkedIn and also on Instagram. You have some great pictures you've taken there. If it's all right, I'll share that with our listeners too. They can see some of your photography as well. You've used that your creative side with those pictures. David, thank you so much for joining this podcast, and just want to wish you the best in 2024.
No, thanks so much, Dave. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.